Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So, kind of more recently in my sketchbook spreads and like a bunch of pages that I've been doing, mostly my sketches have been kind of done in pencil or with ballpoint pen and a little bit of marker here and there, but it's been just a little bit since I've actually done a gouache painting video and just gouache painting in general. Now I feel like it might be a little bit more recent for you guys because I filmed kind of like a few videos back to back for my sketchbook series, and that was kind of like at the beginning of when I was using my sketchbook, so I feel like the gap for you guys is a little bit smaller, but for me it feels like it's a bit longer. But let's talk about a little bit about the process before we move on to everything else. So I am going to be painting Silver Wolf, which is a character from I was going to say Genshin, from Honkai Star Rail. So if you guys have a favorite character from Honkai Star Rail, do let me know, and hopefully one day I'll get around to making some fan art of said character, because I've only really drawn March 7th and Dan Heng for the most part, so hopefully I'll get around to drawing some more characters from that game. But for the gouache process, I usually like to more or less start off with a sketch done with the Color ENO and then sometimes with the Pirsmacolor Col-Eraser, just because I find the red base to be a little bit more easier to cover up and a little bit less jarring when painting. And then after that, I'll go ahead and set kind of like a base and kind of get a better idea of of all the colors that I want to use with using watercolor. And then right now, while I'm working, I'm actually using the gouache, which is the HIMI MIYA jelly gouache, and I'm going to be primarily using that to kind of finish up today's little painting in the sketchbook. Now, I didn't really show up the setup for how I did the spread, so I did do the sketch first, and then I decided that I wanted to have some kind of border around it. It also makes it a little bit easier for me to have binder clips on the edges without having it kind of disrupt the actual painting, because if you've seen like a previous sketchbook where I've kind of painted Baiju in gouache, I had I think it's Baiju. I had binder clips in certain areas and I never removed them while painting, so I have these weird rectangle blank spots like on the painting itself, so it looks kind of funky. But for the most part, I think this is like very much similar steps but I've been mostly using for when I do gouache painting. So kind of have the base for the watercolor just to help with colors, but also give something for the gouache to kind of stick to a little bit if I accidentally do a little bit more of like lighter and more wet washes compared to thicker layers, because I think for the most part gouache does a pretty good job adhering to a lot of like dry surfaces and stuff, and it's quite easy to get more or less like an opaque surface as long as you get a good kind of water to paint ratio. And I find it's a little bit easier to get that because of the jelly gouache being fairly easy to reactivate, and it doesn't really fully dry hard, if that makes sense, as long as like you kind of keep up with the upkeep. There's like a bunch of videos on YouTube where people do kind of little sessions of them cleaning out their palettes and cleaning out the little containers filled with jelly gouache. So I definitely need to go back and do that soon, because I feel like some of my paints are getting a little bit on the weird side where it's kind of hard to scoop out paint easily. So I feel like I need to reactivate them a little bit, stir them in with a little bit of water to get them back to that nice kind of creamy consistency, which is a lot easier to work with. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to talk about, because kind of like sketchbook wise, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but if you guys have suggestions on what you would like me to use in my sketchbook for a video, I know some people wanted to see kind of more inking action, just like in general, either with like the dip pen or some kind of like fine liner or markers or something like that. I'm willing to do more of those soon, and if you have any other suggestions on mediums, do let me know so I can kind of like incorporate them into kind of my sketching sessions for future videos, or just sketching in general, so you guys can see it at the very end whenever I get around to doing a sketchbook tour. I'm gonna try to find my sketchbook right now so I could do a quick flip through and kind of give you guys a little bit of, I don't know, I'm just gonna say my mental state, which is probably not a good way to describe it, but I've been using a lot of ballpoint pen for sketching. I think it's just an easy way to get like darker lines a lot easier, so I don't have to spend too much time building up value and all that with pencil. But yeah, I think that's like mostly the media I've been using in my sketchbook more recently anyways. I think before that I used mostly, I think, kind of more like pencil drawings here and there, a little bit of scribbling of stuff, and it's just been easier for me to not paint in the sketchbook, so I don't have to break out all my palettes, I don't have to get like my water containers or anything like that. But I would like to get more into even just like watercolor painting in the sketchbook, just because I do like the idea of adding more colors to certain spreads, or just like accent colors, just because I think overall it makes it look a little bit more fun to look at after the fact. I always love doing sketchbook tours, or just like once I've completed a sketchbook, and even like in a few months or even a few years, like you go back and look at the different mediums you used to use and how you approach them, or even just seeing like certain colorful spreads during that time. I don't know, for me it feels a little bit more motivating, and sometimes inspires you to do different spreads or more spreads that are similar to those kinds of styles. So a little bit more about the process, because I feel like this painting isn't particularly great for a few reasons. I think I botched up the pose pretty quickly. Initially, I'm not sure if it shows up too well, but in the front left-hand corner, I actually had Silverwolf holding her phone so that she would be kind of, I don't know, blasting through some kind of area while holding her phone, but also kind of like looking towards the viewer. And I decided to get rid of it because I didn't feel up to painting some kind of hand. Sometimes when I draw hands in gouache, I feel like I skip out on it quite a bit, so it looks kind of like chicken scratchy or a little funky because I didn't paint it correctly, or didn't give it enough like dimension or lines for it to feel like actual proper hand. And yeah, I kind of just got rid of it. So she's in this kind of weird pose, and I don't think it really fits how I really wanted to do it. Also, because of, I don't know, frustration, I didn't really paint very, I don't know, planned out for the most part, because even though I was able to get like certain flats everywhere, and then I'm doing kind of like the line work, I feel like for me, line work kind of ties everything together at the very end, because I don't really like coloring or doing line work and then coloring in the lines, because I always feel like it feels a little bit more like a coloring book. But it feels a little bit off sometimes, because I feel like, oh, okay, let me talk about this first, because I don't know if you guys can tell that my webcam is slowly getting closer and closer to my painting surface, and that's because I didn't realize that my little desk mount thing, like it's kind of connected to my shelf on my right, it was kind of slipping off of the shelf for some reason. I don't know how it got loose, but basically because it was slipping, the camera was getting closer and closer, and I actually didn't notice until I actually looked at the recording program, and I was like, oh, did I accidentally like zoom in somehow? But it's not the reason. It's just because my camera was physically getting closer. So at some point it's gonna cut back to normal, so you guys don't have this super zoomed in. Yeah. But you can see that usually the line work and just kind of cleaning up the edges and stuff kind of helps the painting pop a little bit better, because I personally didn't even like my flats at this point. I'm going to try my best to add a little bit more detail to the clothing here and there, but for the most part, because I didn't like how it was turning out, I immediately did the face and kind of just like fleshed out the eyes and the kind of just the facial features, so that I could tell whether or not I could abandon the piece or if I should just continue. And I didn't hate it enough for me to fully abandon it, so I kind of just pushed through. I'm trying my best to add different colors or something else to kind of make it feel a little bit more, I don't know, something that I don't dislike entirely. I think kind of more recently, for any of my gouache paintings, I haven't been really enjoying, and maybe it's because of lack of planning or lack of giving myself the ability to just work on something for like an endless amount of time. So maybe I'll do some gouache painting like off camera, so that I can get a feel back to how I kind of want to use the medium a little bit more. Because gouache for me, I feel like I still struggle a lot with either mixing the consistency of the paint or even just like general layering. But I feel like it also comes with my lack of experience just painting in general. Like I said, painting with like acrylics, oils. I guess gouache kind of falls into this category. I definitely struggle with painting in a more painterly way. And it might be because of the style as well, but I don't allow myself to go a little bit more free. I feel like I keep things a little bit more contained and I try to make things look a little bit more clean, if anything. So hopefully I will try my best to do some either studies or something to allow myself get more familiar with the medium again. And I'll do some maybe smaller sketches and stuff with watercolor, just because painting wise, I think watercolor is a very nice way to add color to your sketchbook without having to commit a whole lot, if that makes sense. I feel like color pencils kind of falls into the same category, but I feel like depending on kind of like your color range, you're a little bit limited with your types of colors. But like with paints, you usually have a good set range. Even if you only have 4 colors, let's say white, red, yellow, and blue, like you can get still a vast range of colors and stuff. So hopefully I will get to do that in my sketchbook a little bit later. I kind of want to paint a little bit of scenery here and there with some watercolor or something like that, and just get a good practice of just mixing colors again, because I do miss painting from time to time, and I'm planning on doing probably a larger painting at some point. It's been a little while since I've done a larger painting. I think the last one I've done was the one of Ike at kind of like the window with the plants and stuff. And I kind of want to do either like a more typical portrait but focus on lighting and getting shadows and like the form more correct, or we can do something with a little bit more background or scenery or something like that. We'll see, because it's also depending on how well I can plan things out. Because usually for watercolor, I do like doing things a little bit more with like florals and portraits, because that's kind of what I used to do back in uni, or when I did a lot of 17 fan art where I did things traditionally. So I kind of want to revisit that, because there are some artworks that I've done during that time that I really enjoyed, but I feel like if I attempt it now, there's a little bit of backtracking that I need to do, because me not doing it for a while, I feel like probably, I don't know, regressed a little bit probably. So I would like to build it back up just a bit, but kind of like bit by bit the more I paint. So hopefully I can do that. And the process of watercoloring, for the most part, I enjoy. So hopefully if I feel up to it, I'll take you guys along with me, and I'll try to record a good chunk of the process. And as usual, I'll try to include more or less like 2 different versions, where one's kind of like a full time lapse, and then the other one's gonna be more real time, kind of like cut up and kind of just like sections of footage, and then me talking over it so that you guys have a little bit more context. But more back about the painting of Silver Wolf. So kind of like after I did the line work for her, I was noticing how flat it looked like, especially for the clothing. So near her like jacket hood area, I wanted to add a little bit more of like kind of different planes of colors to represent kind of like crinkling of clothing, but it's not quite like folds, it's just like different shifts, because if you crease folds on clothing, it kind of gives like a sharp edge. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of that. I don't think it works out too well, and I think it would have benefited me to do some darker shadows for it to read a little bit better. But I think you can probably tell that I'm getting a little bit frustrated with the painting, because I'm hopping from area to area quite quickly rather than try to focus on one area, make it look kind of more or less done before moving on to a different area, which is usually how I like to work, like even digitally and stuff. But sometimes when I get a little bit lost or I don't really like the piece, I tend to hop around, because I might think, oh, maybe this will save the piece, or maybe this will help me fix it, or this will make me like the piece a little bit more. So it's a little bit of coping, but I don't hate the piece too much, and I definitely think it looks a little bit better once I actually take off the Artex tape all the way around, because I don't know if it just needs a clean border. It just looks a little bit too messy for my liking, and I kind of wish I just planned it a little bit more. I think a dark background could have worked a lot nicer, and then I could add in some more effects and stuff. Oh, this is me attempting to do kind of like the glitching or little pixel kind of look for I don't know, just like for computer graphics and stuff. And I tried to make like a little stencil for me to paint in squares and just like little pixel particles. And some squares turned out really nice, and then some of them turned out really oblong-y, and because the paint was a little bit wet when I pulled from it, it didn't remain like a perfect rectangle or square. So at some point I will abandon the little stencil and just paint it in manually. And I didn't really want to paint it in manually at first because I tried it before in the past on a different like spread. I think it was for like a previous inside cover of one of my sketchbooks where I painted Wonu, and he kind of had like the glitching of the pixels and stuff kind of surrounding him because he had a game theme. And I painted in the squares, but I was super picky about making them look good, if that makes sense. So I feel like I should have just went with painting them in manually because they don't look too horrible compared to the blobs that I got from the stencil. So I just think it looks kind of cute adding these different colors. I decided to go with white, pink, and blue just because for the most part they kind of fit the color scheme. And just to tie it in a little bit more, I did add a little bit of purple because I think that's more or less kind of Silver Wolf's color and it kind of suits her. But then I also added a little bit of black. Now I was gonna go ham with the black in certain areas so it makes it look like the screen was breaking, but I decided to just leave it as kind of just these dark patches here and there, and I ended up making it a little bit more of a dark blue in the end because black is just very jarring. So just for it to match a little bit closer, I decided that I just maybe just match the colors a little bit better. So last but not least, to finish off the painting, I am going to be removing the tape. Now for some reason when painting with gouache, sometimes this happens and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the paint for the gouache kind of gets powdery. You can kind of see it, and I'm going to try to clean it up with the tape on itself, but sometimes it doesn't happen. But I actually have I guess I have 2 A4 sheets of paper laid down so that I could easily clean up the mess a little bit later, because I hate having the little powdery particles that kind of is happening from the gouache breaking from the tape. But you can see that only some portions had that, and you can see kind of all the debris on my desk. So I was kind of lucky that I kept the paper there. But here's a close-up of Silver Wolf, and hope you guys enjoyed today's little painting session. And apologies if the comments get turned off at this point. I might be not here on Monday, so I won't be able to turn them on probably as quickly if they do accidentally get turned off. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!